Hey all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive, and today it is time for a review of the 1959 biography by Robert J. Rayback, Millard Fillmore, Biography of a President. There is very little at all to say about, I suppose, either of these two figures in a way, but especially about Robert Rayback. We know that he was a professor of history at Syracuse University. His brother helped co-write a biography of Martin Van Buren that I had considered acquiring and reviewing, although I did end up going a different route for my Van Buren entry. This particular Fillmore biography appears to be the only book that Rayback wrote, at least the only one of any sort of note. So yeah, kind of a very sparse field of knowledge about this particular biographer. But that seems fitting given the subject. Millard Fillmore has not been the subject of very many biographies in his life. The 13th president of the United States. He was born in poverty, self-made intellectual who established a law practice in Buffalo, New York, and became a major figure in that Buffalo political scene. It eventually caused him to get a congressional seat, and he grew to wield a lot of power, becoming one of the major political figures in the New York scene, along with Thurlow Weed and the abolitionist figure William Seward. And because of that power and his ability to kind of not move the needle, he was a more conservative figure than anybody else who was major in New York at that time. He became the vice presidential nominee of Zachary Taylor in the 1848 election. Fillmore was very much an inactive vice president for a lot of his time. But then Zachary Taylor died in 1850. Fillmore had to step into the presidency at a very marked and important time. This was right in the middle of the Compromise of 1850 debates, so Fillmore essentially had to take over a country that felt like it was on the verge of collapse. And as far as Rayback's description goes, in a way, Fillmore seems to have saved it by helping agree to the compromise. And but that's the interesting thing too. Fillmore historically is one of the worst regarded presidents because he is one of the do-nothing presidents. He's associated as one of the do-nothing presidents from the late 1840s throughout the 1850s who essentially acted as doormats as the secession crisis, the everything related to the issue of slavery kind of started getting worse and creating a larger gap in the nation. And all these presidents were not really doing much of anything to support, I guess, the abolitionist side. Essentially, again, the term doormats, I think, describes them very well. And Fillmore really starts that train. You could argue it starts with Taylor, but I think Fillmore is really the key one, especially when it comes to the Fugitive Slave Act, which Fillmore was against in principle, but because he interpreted it as supporting the existing Constitution, he said, okay, that's fine, and let it pass, essentially. And it's interesting to see Rayback's portrayal of Fillmore here and how sympathetic it is. And I'm not trying to say that Rayback is coming from the standpoint of someone who is sympathetic to the South or anything along those lines. I think it's the opposite. I think Rayback is coming from a standpoint of Fillmore's top priority was preserving the Union, and that in itself is a noble deed. And, you know, and in some ways I understand the idea of like, okay, you're trying to draw a through line to someone like Lincoln here, because ultimately that was Lincoln's focus as well, was Union preservation over anything else. But I think you also have to look at it from a kind of moral and ethical standpoint too, of, I think Lincoln's version of Union preservation looked very different from Fillmore's, and they even talk about it in the book as well, about how Fillmore disagreed with Lincoln and some of his approaches to resolving the secession crisis and the Civil War. I think it has not aged well. The perspective that Fillmore had, and the idea that he must save the Union at all costs, and damn the slaves, essentially. And Rayback doesn't grapple with that. And this is a very old biography. So in some sense, I don't really expect him to, since this is from 59. And yet it is it's one of maybe like 2 or 3 Millard Fillmore biographies that really exist. He's such an uninteresting figure fundamentally on so many levels that very few people have ever tried to chronicle his life. And I don't think this biography makes a super compelling case for it to be updated. Fillmore as a person seems to be well-intentioned enough, but is not someone who's super intriguing. His personal life doesn't get a whole lot of attention, although it is interesting that his wife passed away literally days after they left the White House. I think that's a storyline that is worth exploring and playing into more, but it kind of gets glossed over here. I'm also not a super huge fan of this, and this is not unique to Rayback either, but this writing style that is very talking about kind of, a series of events and describing events that happen, but not necessarily going for a bigger picture idea of why those events are important. Again, this is a trademark of a lot of older biographies, where it says this thing happened on this day. Fillmore talked to this person, and then this thing happened on this day. Never really takes a second to kind of step back and explore the significance of it. I think the closest it comes to doing that is during the period of time when Fillmore is taking over the presidency after he learns of Zachary Taylor's death, and the feeling of sheer dread that he experiences because he knows how tense things are in the American landscape, in the American political landscape. And that bit is a little bit powerful, but otherwise I don't think this really takes a ton of time to invest in its subject matter, and really attempt to understand him. That said, I think it's a sympathetic portrait. So there is an angle here. It's not completely disinterested, but number one, it's not an angle that I agree with, and I don't think it's defended in a super compelling way. And number two, again, I think Fillmore is a fundamentally uninteresting figure when push comes to shove. So I don't think this book could have salvaged it, even if it was trying to make a really compelling case. So when push comes to shove, all in all, I think that this is a contender for the worst presidential biography that I have read thus far. And certainly I think the least essential. I know that there are a lot of other obscure presidents who are getting biographies kind of written about them in recent years. Fillmore is probably going to be at the bottom of most people's lists, and I think that's very understandable. Do I think we could benefit from a contemporary Fillmore biography that views the challenges that he went through and the decisions that he made through a more modern understanding of the social issues that were surrounding him? Certainly. I think that would absolutely be beneficial. But if that biography takes, a few more decades to be written, I'm not going to be holding my breath for it either. So not really a recommendation here, unfortunately. With that, I want to thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. As always, more reviews are to come. Hit that bell for notifications and tell a friend as well. Thanks so much, and I will see you next time right here at your home of the Music Deep Dive.